Singleton noted in the uterus. Now let's just run through the test. I'm sorry, it's a very, very busy page. Maybe I'm just going to stand up. Let's just say, so she comes in, this is like day 1. All right, so let's just start up here. So hemoglobin's actually about 12.1. Platelet count is 187. Her white cell count is about 5.58. Okay. I think too unremarkable there. CK wasn't done. She has U's done. They all look okay. Appropriately, the creatinine's low. It's for pregnancy. Importantly, if we go up to an actual liver profile, let's just look at the pattern. So she's jaundiced, body of about 152. It's about 110 appropriately conjugated. We look at the alpha gamma GT 199, 167. And then we see a disproportionate transaminitis. An ALT of sort of sniffing 1800, 1700, 1800, and an AST about 2600. Okay, so that's the picture. If you look at that, I mean, the picture is one of a hepatitis, predominant situation. Albumin's still quite well preserved. She has some eye study done the next day. You can see pretty abnormal, 7,888. Very difficult to interpret eye studies in some cases in acute liver injury. A lot of liberation, but you always have to park that and see how that fits into the bigger picture. So that's kind of where we're at on when she presents. She's jaundiced, she's got a significant hepatitis, and the rest of things are fairly unremarkable. Now, I think it's not inappropriate. At the same time, you do an INR, and you can see it's 1.38, right? Over the ensuing few days, you see it is niggling up. Right? And I think not inappropriate, as most you would do, as they hit the deck, they get a Hep A, B, C done. All right? So Hep A, IgM is negative, B is negative, C is negative. That's really the first 24 hours of presentation. All right? Patient's in front of you. She's 17 weeks pregnant. Stories I've given to you. So let me ask you, I mean, how would we clinically define the problem? Just from the liver profile, I think we've kind of indicated how we would clinically define the problem. It's a
hepatitis with
hepatitis. Does she have acute liver failure?
No.
Yes. Signs of synthetic dysfunction. Signs of synthetic dysfunction. INR is 1.38, I think it was. And I mean, bilirubin's, total bilirubin is also elevated, which shows there is an element of synthetic impairment. Although her albumin was normal, but if she's in the inflammatory phase, you'd expect it to be a negative reactant. So if you sort of accommodate for that, 35 would probably be low in the presence of inflammation. So I'd say yes, she has synthetic impairment.
Okay, so let's maybe just knuckle down on cortisol. How do we define what acute liver failure is? I mean, what's liver failure actually? How do we define liver failure? Very succinctly. You're quite correct. So failure of function.
Yeah.
And the best way we can mark that is really to say there's coagulopathy and or encephalopathy. That's really, so she wasn't really encephalopathic. But I did sort of was a bit naughty in saying to you that INR is, despite vitamin K and other things, it's edging off. So technically she is actually in acute liver failure. Okay, it's quite a severe acute liver injury. And so what would your management be at this point? What would you do? Obviously I would admit her, I think that's reasonable. I think sending her home would not be a great thing.
So you'd give her full supportive care and then trying to find out what the cause is.
Okay.
So I would treat her for underlying sepsis. Her PCT was 0.5. She's very jaundiced.
Okay, I mean, absolutely. I think supportive care is the hallmark of the situation. By supportive care, screen for infection, treat appropriately, give IV Vit-K, monitor the sugars, maybe give a line-up, So you really are just supporting and observing. But your investigations are not finished, and we're going to get there next. Would you give her N-acetylcysteine? You felt she was an acute liver failure. She had a severe acute liver injury with coagulopathy. Would you give her?
So if it's non-paracetamol, but if it's from a drug-induced liver injury aspect, they say that there has been shown some benefit to using NAC even for non-acetaminophen overdoses. But the actual evidence says that it doesn't actually speed up your normalization of your LFTs. It actually, the benefit is a reduction in the number of days in hospital, and it does reduce the likelihood of the need for liver transplantation in a meta-analysis. But in the acute setting, it actually only reduces your duration of stay.
Okay, so let's start with the first point you made. It's very, very good. We've got some data, in fact it's local data. Shiraz Musa, our colleague with ourselves and others, published a study last year. It was a randomized placebo-controlled study, and what they did was they had patients with a very common cause of acute liver injury in our setting, which is TB-DILI, anti-TB-DILI, and they were randomized to receive NAC versus non-NAC, and that's where that point came in. There was no difference in outcome. In the data sub-analysis, patients seemed to normalize or improve their liver profile faster, and their length of hospital stay was reduced. But in terms of overall outcome, there was no real difference in terms of mortality ultimately. Okay, so we've got that local data. So one would say, you know, if you have a severe TB-DILI, is there benefit to mortality? No. I mean, if you have issues around bed pressures and stuff like that, maybe there's benefit to it. But I think that's the way now. But on the issue of NAC and I'm not saying NAC in paracetamol. That's a given. We're talking now about non-paracetamol injuries.
It's a good question on that point. If a patient is taking therapeutic doses of paracetamol and they have acute liver failure, would they also have a stronger drive to use NAC in that situation?
Absolutely. We were just talking about this last week. We actually had a patient last year, and it's a very important clinical scenario. Therapeutic doses of paracetamol needs to be seen in the context of the patient as well. And we all see our interns dutifully write up 1 gram QID on the medication chart. Everybody, I don't see anybody come through a door not get 1 gram QID. And for some reason, out of all the drugs on a drug chart, I don't know about your center, it's the one thing the nurses give religiously.
Yeah.
I mean, we forget about the antibiotic dosing sometimes, but we get the paracetamol 1 gram QID for some obscure reason. Okay. Now, even if you write PRM, but anyway. But having said that, we had a lady last year who, in fact, had quite severe hyperemesis gravidarum. So you've got somebody coming in with a bit of abnormal liver profile, and then she was kind of on the mend, and she was written up for a gram QID. So you've got somebody there who's been vomiting, who's nutritionally depleted, who's got all this glycogen depletion and probably loss of glutathione as well in her liver. And you give her a gram QID, and she got a severe acute in-hospital paracetamol bleeding. So we need to be cautious about the way we write our paracetamol as well. It needs to be related. So you're absolutely right. Therapeutic can be problematic in the context of the patient. Not common, obviously. But that's true. So just to get to the next word, so I just took this from 2020 from the Cochrane collaboration, then I just pasted that down and just, the bottom line is they're actually kind of saying there's actually insufficient evidence for IV NAC in patients. And it is a controversial issue because the issue had its genesis in around about 2010. A chap who's quite one of the leaders in DILI investigations, Jeff, it's Will Lee. And Will Lee published the issue around the use of NAC from a database experience in the US from Ireland, looking at whether there was transplant-free survival, and there possibly was. We have to say in that particular study, they did come back and say that a lot of advanced samples were looked at, and some of those folks who benefited actually had paracetamol adducts in their urine. One wonders if they didn't benefit because they were listed as cryptogenic, but were they actually paracetamol at the end of the day? So I'm not going to stop anybody. People ask this question a lot. I'm not going to stop anybody using NAC. I think the potential for harm is quite low. Right. For the first time in my life, in the last 2 weeks, I had a patient react to NAC who couldn't believe it. I promise you, the first time they got a bit of a urticaria as the drip started running, and I said, "Stop it." and run it slower in half an hour after giving a little bit of vinegar and stuff, and actually it was fine. It's quite bizarre. I've never seen it. I've never seen it in my career, and prachtig I see it in the last 2 weeks. Anyway.
So yesterday, I mean, I had actually put up that unit because you know, I was partially up those points, and you know, a bit of time pressure. There was a meta-analysis looking at survival outcomes that I think this thing alludes to, and the difference in terms of transplant-free survival was marked. Low risk drug. We were also using it for alcohol.
I'm of the view that if you use it, use it. I don't have any problem. I'm just saying, if we want to go with true evidence, that's what Cochrane says. But Cochrane is not Mount Olympus. Okay, we must remember that as well. I'm just saying that's what Cochrane says. All right, and because the data is controversial, but I believe that in our setting, when you're up against your son is backed into a corner, you must throw the kitchen sink at a patient. Okay? I've got no problem with it. Just like in acute patients, we often just draw the blood for herpes and give acyclovir. Okay. Now that means are we load shedding or what just happened there? So now this is the really important thing, guys. Remember, we still got a patient with acute hepatitis. Okay. You know, we need to investigate. So I need to hear from you. What else do you want to do? Now just remember, Bilal, you probably went through this yesterday. Remember, the pattern of AST may be useful. And the one thing I always say to people, the reason why I did hepatology is because it's really easy in my brain too much. Okay. So when your ALT is really above 1,000, it comes down to viral, comes down to autoimmune, ischemic, drug or toxin. Okay. Other causes often don't have these massive quantum rises above 1,000. And if you look at this sort of diagram, you can see where you can sort of position the level of ALT, AST, and you sort of see it sitting up here. Okay. Remember the classic 2-to-1 ratio with alcohol, but remember AST predominating can also be seen in severe acute injuries, can be seen in Wilson disease, for example, and then the extrahepatic sources. And don't forget the situation where we have,
Sclerosis.
No idea. Sorry, there we go. So this is coming out here. The sort of unexplained ALT innovations, the one that catches us, and I'm sure we're all medical people here. I can say anti-surgical things. Okay. So don't forget the surgeon's calling you about the transaminatus in the younger person who's actually got cholangitis. Okay. They can take the numbers to above 1,000. Severe acute cholangitis, often in younger people, can be above 1,000. Okay. But it's the history there that gives you the clue. So don't forget viruses. Remember, we all ABCD, we've gone through ABCD. A at the moment, I'm sure you've seen it, there is an outbreak of A at the moment. They're coming in, they're rolling in thick and fast at the moment, and that's related to our load shedding and sewage issues. And the fact that we are socio-demographically transitioning, so our amount of natural AIGG out there is declining, we're seeing a lot more. Remember, Hep B, the enteric illnesses we tend to see in adults, children are always asymptomatic. Why they go into chronicity. Hep C is, jaundice is unusual. And just don't forget about hepatitis E. We've got data from Metropolvaria about a 30% Hep E IgG seroprevalence. But remember, in pregnancy, it's a bad thing. There's a high risk for acute liver failure and a high risk for mortality, about 30%.
Do we actually have the correct assays to test for Hep B in South Africa?
You absolutely hit the nail on the head. That's why I want to hear from you what test you're going to do. I'm telling you, I asked you, but in the interest of time, I'm going ahead. Don't forget about this one. We've spoken about it before. Herpes, hepatitis, again. I'm mentioning it. It's uncommon. It's often more commonly immune-compromised people, but it can be immune-competent people. Okay? All right? And if it's immune-competent, almost a third of patients are often pregnant at the time, and they don't necessarily, only 50% will have mucocutaneous disease, either the lips or genitals. Okay? It's severe. If patients die because the diagnosis is made late, but acyclovir is the management. Drugs or toxins, we've got a plethora of them. Okay, even recreational drugs, and then we've got our own homegrown ones. We've seen these patients take buchu and various other medicines. So, investigations, folk, what do you want? You want hepatitis E, don't you? What test you're going to do? The serology tests we have are not great. You probably will do them anyway, but they're not great. You need to PCR. Okay? You PCR at the moment until we've got better tests available, which is probably going to be negative. So send off the serology, but ask for a Hep B PCR. If you're in NHLS, if you're in one of the private labs, they'll probably refer it back because there are a few, just a handful of people doing PCRs. Okay, so you do a Hep B PCR, absolutely needed. All right. What else do you think? What else are you going to do? If you had a PCR Hep B, it's negative. Well, just to get the viruses out the way. CMV, EBV is not unreasonable. Again, serology, try and do the serology, but ask for PCRs as well so you can get a contextual issue. And then, of course, last year and the preceding year, there was an outbreak of what, and all these kids were described? Adenovirus. So we did an adenovirus panel as well for the hell of it, really through the kitchen sink, and that was all negative. So ABCE is negative, CMV, EBV, Hep, herpes simplex was done as well, okay? It's all negative. I heard somebody say autoimmune markers. Very reasonable, 32-year-old. So you can see autoantibodies, including smooth, etc. Smooth muscle was negative. We're going to get onto those next. But had a total IgG done, which is pretty normal as well. Okay, it's quite unremarkable. But there's all the markers. Anti-nuclear was positive, 1 in 320, just a speckled pattern. Difficult. IgG plumb normal, difficult to interpret. I've put the IgGs up there, 12.6, you can see. Okay, and smooth, you saw on the previous page, was negative. Difficult situation. So now we've got a hepatitis in pregnancy, haven't we? Remember, so we've got pregnancy-specific disease, we've got this first trimester, second trimester, third trimester diseases. We sort of are mid-trimester at the moment, going, you know, we really are a mid-trimester patient. But don't forget, ICP very much can start in second, but typically in third. It's a transaminitis. They may or may not be jaundice. Pruritus is a common feature, but bile acids are the way to go to make that call. All right, help, we've all seen it. Again, no obstetricians in the room, please. Help can occur after delivery. Okay, it can. Please tell them that. All right, stop asking us. This can't be help when it's help. All right. So, HELLP syndrome, we know what you need to do. You need to deliver the baby, and then AFLP. AFLP, guys, is a third trimester problem. Okay, it is a third trimester problem. It's the L-Shan deficiency. All right, and so 17 weeks, I would think acute late liver pregnancy really not something one is going to seriously entertain as a possible diagnosis. Remember, they present late. They are really sick. The enzymes are often not beyond 1,000. They're often just in the hundreds. They've got profound synthetic dysfunction, lactotemia, coagulopathy, encephalopathy, worsening renal function. You need to get the baby out, and the risks are high. Autoimmune hepatitis in pregnancy. Remember, autoimmune hepatitis, we know that the sign of note of autoimmune hepatitis is histological evidence of plasmid lymphocytic infiltrate. All right. And of course, patients can present acutely. They may present in pregnancy. They can present in fulminants in pregnancy. If we look at actual pregnancy, that should be pregnancy, not pregnancy. Flares in patients with no autoimmune, about 7 to 21%. And then flares can occur postpartum, and that's the take-home message. If you've got somebody who's autoimmune stable and pregnant, and they're fine, make sure they get followed up closely once they deliver, because that's when they often flare. Okay. Now, let's get back to our patient. So I'm going to just take you through her clinical course. We're now going through the ensuing 7-8 days. Bile goes from 152 to 236. All right. Albumin drops off. Transaminases are going from right to left, dropping from up in the 1700s, dropping down. All right. Iron, you can see, actually sort of melts away as the transaminases are melting away. INR is going 172, 193, 2.2, 1 point it's 4. And then there's quite a lot of coax support given, and it dips back down. Okay. And you see ammonia, and I'm sure Badal spoke about ammonia yesterday. I'll spend time on that. But ammonia levels are actually slowly rising. All right. So we've got a situation clinically on day 7 of admission. She's really now becoming confused. There's evidence of a developing encephalopathy. She's actually got a bit of ascites clinically. She has an MRI scan, by the way, it's plumb normal, not showing any acute cerebral edema at this point. Discussion with ourselves about the continued viability of that pregnancy. Can't have a pregnancy on board in this situation, it's just not feasible. One thing about fetuses and babies is they tend to abandon a sinking ship, and that just becomes a disaster. So, in discussion with the family and her husband, they decided to give her mifepristone, and she spontaneously delivered about 24 hours later. But immediately after delivering, there was a rapid decline in her level of consciousness. She had to be intubated for airway protection. Also became hemodynamically unstable. So, this is the problem.
Yes, we actually had something similar recently. Just in terms of the pregnancy, coagulopathy, and the delivery. What we kind of really battled with deciding what to do here, because I think Our Lady arrived to us very coagulopathic, and very early term. She was 12 weeks.
Yeah. So, I mean, POP happened, she did spontaneously deliver. There obviously, the gynaes were there to rub that uterus, and oxytocin was used, and there was coag support, and you can see that bump down in the INR was just a lot of coag thrown in. So she did ooze, but that fortunately wasn't a big issue. But in terms of where you are in, I mean, obviously the earlier the pregnancy, perhaps a little bit easier. But the problem in these patients is they end up continuing to bleed, and they end up having hysterectomies as well. I mean, this is a real disaster.
Can I go back one step, Mark?
Sure.
You crossed over the augmentin. She had how many days of augmentin?
5 days.
5 days.
Yeah. So the
And she had
interval
augmentin
between the
before.
augmentin and the onset of the pruritus was about 6 weeks.
After the augmentin. So it's 5 days, short course, and then a long interval. She didn't become short.
So we have a problem. We have a 32-year-old woman. She's now 18 weeks pregnant. She's now delivered. She's got acute liver failure, secondary to jaundice hepatitis.
They'll be back.
We're back. This thing's a little bit titchy here. Anyway, so that's the problem, guys. We said transfer her to us immediately. We were waiting for the decision of the TOP to happen. It was all in evolution, quite a difficult thing to transfer at that point. Once that happened, she crashed, she was transferred over to us. So she arrived by us. On arrival, INR was 4.21. Platelets are 89, that's reflecting on 6 years. This is her liver profile, so she's 279. Okay, she's been getting a lot of IV albumin support. Transaminases have dropped further. Candidicular enzymes never really much of a player in all of this. Lactate was 4.1 and pH was 7.3. So I'm sure Bilal went through these issues, but just to say, we actually repeated on admission everything. She came in and she then had bloods done repeatedly. The repeated screen from NHLS they do these ANA screens, you can see it's quite strongly positive. Smooth muscles now coming up positive, and IgG is just sitting on 16.29, LKM is negative. Again, difficult to interpret. You've got massive necrosis going on, or an injury, exposure of a lot of subcellular organelles, autoimmune antibodies. And ANF doesn't make it autoimmune, the lack of ANF does not make it autoimmune. Okay? That's the problem. This is difficult to interpret. Right? But effectively, we have a woman who we were working on the presumption of a possible drug-induced liver injury. We could not say that augmentin was not playing a role, but the pattern was perhaps a bit unusual for augmentin. Those cholestatic injuries are usually there's a strong cholestatic component. This wasn't. And the hepatitis injury of augmentin probably tends to be a more earlier injury. It's that late cholestatic one that can come several weeks later. But we had a history of it. I don't think you can bounce autoimmune out of the park. Woman, okay, 32 years old. But we effectively were dealing with a woman who was, you had to say, sort of an uncertain etiology. Okay? And Bill all went through this yesterday. If you really look at the criteria and you're wondering, you look at the INR, and these are well validated. They go back, I think, to the late 80s, don't they, Jeff? The King's College criteria
Yes.
go back to the late 80s.
Yes.
Yeah, they go back to the late 80s.
John O'Grady's criteria, and they probably a bit dated.
But they stood the test of time.
Yeah, yeah.
So you look at those, you look at age, Billy Rubin, 300 is the benchmark. But importantly, how long have you been around? Very rapid, very fulminant is almost slightly better. But when you sort of grumble for a while and then go off, you almost, it portends for a worse prognosis. Drugs are generally worse, okay. And then there is this talk about when you have cryptogenic or uncertain has a worse prognosis.
You asked about other investigations. Would you have a particular TJ biopsy in this lady once she'd been delivered, perhaps, and you would?
Absolutely, but Jeff, absolutely. I mean, that would have perhaps been a possibility had she been more stable. But we have now grade 4 encephalopathy. We have a worsening coagulopathy and a decline that has now proceeded over about a 10-12 day period. So we in fact made the decision to list her urgently. We thought we were probably not going to win this one. We listed her. A liver became available the next morning, and it was an ABO incompatible. Unfortunately, she was an O, but we were offered an A. We made the decision to proceed because by the next morning the INR had got worse and things were just getting slowly worse, and I think you had no choice. Discussed it with the family and they agreed, and she proceeded to transplant. Extraordinarily stormy course post-operatively, but she's actually done very well, and it'll be her anniversary in May of the 1 year of transplant. But clearly a very difficult situation. 32-year-old, primigraded, battling to fall pregnant, and this happens, and then you wake up and you have a transplant. It's not an easy situation for anybody. But I'm going to finish off by let's go and look at the explant histology. Right. So the explant histology. First of all, that was the only island of viable hepatocytes we could find. Everything around that is necrotic and dead. It's dead. Okay. There's a central vein. All right. There's a central vein. It's just dead. It's hand-locked necrosis. Okay. Right. There's a wonderful lymphoid follicle. All right, sitting right there near a portal tract. There's a beautiful bile duct. It's looking quite happy. Okay. The bile duct is looking quite happy. It's being untouched. All right. There's a little bile duct sitting right there. Dead cells. Let's look at the cells. It's lymphocytes and it's plasma cells. It's plasma lymphocytic all over the place. And there's actually a collection of plasmas and lymphocytes. And there's a whole lot of cholestasis and bile plugging. And this just shows furthermore. And if you look at the reticulate stain, I think you can appreciate that absolute collapse and gone. So this really is very compatible with autoimmune hepatitis. And so what we have here is a 32-year-old woman, 18 weeks pregnant, who presents effectively with fulminant or acute liver failure due to either de novo presentation or a flare of undiagnosed chronic. Very difficult to say. You can't say what either. But autoimmune hepatitis, when it does this now, I think we are really pressed for time, so with all needs to get going. But
No, carry on. Mine's is very lengthy.
okay.
So let's do this.
That's what you asked. In a clinical context like this severe, does anti-actinin also, does that falsely also elevate in a situation like this, like any of the other antibodies? I haven't seen anything that, if someone...
I don't know. I don't know, and I'm going to claim poverty here because these are enzymes, these are autoantibodies I almost never do. There is, what we have access to certainly in HLS is very limited. We get anti-nuclear ANAs, we get Alcam, Smooth, etc., AMA. But there's this whole panel you can now get on PathCare called an autoimmune level panel. I don't know what half of them mean. And sometimes, quite frankly, I think they're more trouble than what they're worth. Because people say, oh, but this
A lot of them.
LCs, I don't know,
Because I saw that lady also had a row 52 positive as well. type
what does it
three? Is that a type three?
mean? What does it mean? I know, I mean, what does it mean in somebody who's acutely
That
unwell?
panel also includes your PVC.
That is it.
Numbers, your anti-roadway also includes.
Anti-road, well, give you a show print.
Right, so in terms of like your bile ductopathies, not necessarily that it's an autoimmune hepatitis screening, it's autoimmune liver disease. AMA-M2, your GLP 210, SP100 are all in that panel, which then add to your other diagnoses and information there.
But just to say, I mean, you know, lymphoid follicles in patients is really a telling feature, but I thought this is not something we see very often. This is actually a collection of plasma cells sitting right there. You don't see that very often. Right? I mean, this is really florid autoimmune.
And would you pulse a patient like this? Would you rather just, if you, because I mean, too much.
So I think that's the important discussion point here. And the important discussion point is when autoimmune does this, they're going to die, unfortunately, unless you can actually get them transplanted. That's the one hope. To be honest, with the clinician phoned me on day one, when I got all the negative viral markers, I said, put her on 10 milligrams of prednisone. She was just on 10 milligrams of prednisone because I was working on DILI, and DILI or maybe autoimmune really wasn't coming up. We had on a little bit of steroids, but pulsing people like this would be a humongous mistake because you could almost render them untransplantable in the sense that you're just going to make them septic. They're going to fall apart and they're going to get funky in your hand and they're going to be untransplanted. Or they're going to die peri-transplant from overwhelming sepsis.
If you look at your autoimmune treatment criteria, this kind of podcast in terms of a fulminant autoimmune, and there is actually about not to progress directly towards transplantation. Just out of curiosity, what did you induce it with? Induction immune suppression?
No, I mean, it was standard. Yeah, I mean, the ABO issue actually, aged means I actually never,
Did you use the glycosol columns?
never had to use it, fortunately.
What were the titers?
The worst it got to was about 1 in 32. I think there was one that was double that one source. That's what happened operatively quite by.
Blood.
Well, no. Whether to this day my surgeons won't tell me if it was accidentally on purpose. With all the bleeding and issues, intraoperatively, she ended up having a splenic laceration and she had a splenectomy. So a splenectomy on the table becomes a surgical rituximab. And so ABO incompatibility is an issue because obviously you're generating antibodies and you may have to use anti-CD20 and then absorption columns. But in patients who are so critically unwell, I must say, absorption columns plus dialysis plus everything else, which absorption columns makes it much easier. Pre-absorption columns, you have plasma exchanging. Plus dialysis, plus everything else, it's nightmarish in somebody who's hemodynamically unstable. Yes, sir.
Yes, the cells are completely destroyed. So I want to find out what about the histology tells us that it's autoimmune.
It's plasma lymphocytic, and you've got lymphoid aggregates. It's the nature of the cellular infiltrate. Virus doesn't look like this, and steatohepatitis, etc., doesn't look like